I'm Dr. Elizabeth Berliner, and I am the Director of Clinical Programs for the Maddie Shelter Medicine Program here at Cornell. And so our program spends a fair amount of time actually in the shelters on the floor. Some of you, we've probably visited your shelters. If we haven't, feel free to invite us someday. And so we have 2 interns also that we train and veterinary students. So we tend to come as a collective, so a little bit of warning. And we recently did acquire funding for a little bit of a bus too. It's only a van, but I like to think of it as a bus. And so we are on the floors working with the shelters, hands-on, trying to solve problems in cooperation with you guys. And so please, if you have questions, feel free to contact us. Our email and our phone consultation line is on the website. And we love to get challenging, fun, new questions from people out there doing the hard work. So today what I'm going to do is try to focus on some of the most practical strategies that I know for improving the health of the animals in your shelter. And Jan set up a really nice introduction talking a bit about length of stay, and that's going to be one of the ones I'm going to focus on the most. And so I love this. How many of you have seen the guidelines for standards of care in shelters? Good, fair number of you, excellent. If you haven't seen it, the set of guidelines, about 80-page document that came out in 2010. It's available online, completely free for downloading, and it is divided into multiple sections that help you think about goals and approaches and guidelines for standards in your shelters and things that practices you could, should, might want to think about doing. So I highly encourage you to take a look at it if you're not familiar with it. And what I've done is pull out a couple of key statements that I keep in the back of my mind as I'm looking at a shelter. So this is one of my favorite snippets. Effective population management requires a plan for intentionally managing each animal's shelter stay that takes into consideration the organization's ability to provide care. And so if we break that down, what we're looking at is that we're talking about how to look at each animal. And most of us went into humane work because we care about each and every animal we come into contact with. Fair enough? Yeah, a lot of nodding heads. So we are invested in each animal, but we need to be aware of how each animal plays into the health of our population as a whole. And that's what Jan was talking about earlier. And what I also like about this is that it's about intentionally managing. We think about it. We set an intention for that animal as part of our larger population. And by impacting and improving the health of that animal, we improve our entire population. And that's what we're focusing on today. So that's one of my favorite little snippets that I keep in my head. So I'm going to encourage you to really think of the shelter as a system. I will use 2 words, system and business. We have a set up system. It's a living, breathing organism on some days where every single part is absolutely key to how the entire organization works. And so just as a simple schematic, and certainly there's all kinds of squiggly lines that could get drawn into this pretty quickly, even in one day. But we have animals coming in, owner-surrendered animals or stray, and I've really simplified this. Obviously, we sometimes have seized animals or cruelty cases and other sorts of cases that come in. This is the shelter. So we have this big box in the center where all these things need to happen in order for that animal to get to leave the shelter. We have foster where they sometimes take a little U-turn. They go out for a little while and come back to us, but inevitably they're going to be back into our system. We have some that get returned to their owners, and it's kind of key that we want to maximize that when we can. And then they leave our shelter through a variety of methods. Adoption, we hope, maybe transferred to another organization, sometimes euthanasia if that's in the best interest of that animal. And there are other options. But at some point they need to leave, and our goal should be to help them make it to adoption, make it to transfer, and sometimes even in severe cases make it to euthanasia as quickly as possible in the most humane manner possible. So you tell me, and I'm not using the clickers today because I'm going to ask for active audience participation. You guys seemed pretty brave earlier, so I think we'll be all right. You look like a tough crowd. So what organization level factors, what things at the level of the system negatively impact the health of the animals in the shelter? Who can give me one? Yes, please. The number that come in, absolutely. Overcrowding is probably the biggest one. And in fact, it's the first one on my list, so thank you very much. What else? Yes, stress. Absolutely. Stress on who? On the animals and on the staff and on the organization and on the checkbook. Stress on all levels impacts the health of those animals, without a doubt. Good. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
Your protocols when an animal comes in.
Perfect. Protocols or lack thereof, okay? So your protocols, if they're well written and they're implemented, can have really positive impacts on your animals. If you don't have protocols or a plan, or if people aren't following them, then that can be a really negative impact on your animals. That's key. Yes, ma'am.
Staff training or lack thereof.
Perfect. Staff training. And that can be everywhere from managing stress of the animals and themselves, to managing caring for the animals, to managing resource allocation. So training your staff, not only in their job, but sometimes to multitask. I would assume that some of you probably do more than one job in the shelter. Fair enough? Okay. So training your staff is key. And it's probably, tell me if I'm wrong, it's probably one of the first things that gets put on the back burner when things get busy. Staff training. So you have the intention, we're going to do some staff training, and then things get busy, and you're like, oh, we'll have to do it next week. Oh, we'll have to do it next week. And suddenly time has gone by, and you've had new people come into your shelter, or people who've been there for a while that maybe never got trained. Fair enough? So it happens. Good. Anything else? Yes, ma'am. Perfect. So the actual caring, cleaning, disinfection, handling of the animals absolutely impacts them. And Doctors Lowry and Henry will be discussing some of those things today in terms of how to improve those protocols in order to improve the health of your animals. I think you guys might have covered everything. Let's see. Oh, prolonged length of stay, number 2, since that is what I'm talking about today. Keeping the animals in the shelter longer than you need to. And you tell me, well, we only keep them until we find an adopter. Like, what do you want me to do about that? Well, that's what I'm going to try to focus on in terms of ways that we can try to decrease that length of stay. Lack of timely preventive care, that gets into the issues of protocol. Lack of screening for infectious diseases. So if you don't have staff that are trained or you don't have protocols in place to actually look for signs of infectious disease, then you're going to miss it. And if you miss it in one animal, what happens? Everybody gets it. So missing it in that one animal has potential to impact your entire organization. Good. Lack of protocols. You already gave me that answer. Lack of resources. That's usually the first one I get. So it's interesting. I was happy to hear overpopulation or overcrowding before lack of resources. We all know that we have challenges with resources, correct? But we're pretty determined not to let that impact the health of our animals. Fair enough? So what can we do with what we've got to keep them healthy? And then lack of population management, which is why you guys are here today to talk about how do we actually look at managing that herd of cats. Because I have a hard enough time managing my one, right? So goal setting, and Dr. Scarlett addressed this as well. She spent a fair amount of time on this, actually setting goals for your shelter, and I hope each of you at least has something written down on your pad today to go home and try to do in terms of setting a goal. So use the data, which is what she talked about. Make priorities, because you can't tackle it all at once, even though you may try to do that in your personal life like I do, and in your professional life. The truth is you really need to prioritize what needs to come first. What will surprise you is that a lot of times if you do what comes first, all those other goals start to fall into place. And I have evidence of that today. So choose the most important goal, and you may really be, maybe staff training needs to be your most important goal and your priority. And then suddenly things start to fall into place, like people are following protocols and people are cleaning more effectively. People are handling the animals better and they're getting a hide box when they come in. So maybe that staff training piece is what needs to happen first. But if you prioritize, you'll often find that the next things just kind of happen. And it's really exciting when things just happen like that. Celebrate your successes. I'm not good at this. I'm trying to get better at it. Remembering to actually celebrate when things go well. Recognizing that you know you've got more work to do, right? But it's really, really important in our line of work that we celebrate what we have been successful at before we move on to the next task. And don't expect overnight success. It takes time. Things take time. And it may even take some kind of cultural shift or a shift in way of thinking for your shelter, and that doesn't happen overnight. So why is flow-through planning? And there's a new term I just threw out. But the idea is when you're looking at that shelter system, the flow is going with the arrow. So we are planning to flow through the shelter as quickly as possible. And it's important because of what Dr. Scarlett already addressed. The longer an animal stays in the shelter, the more likely it is to get sick. And the data we have to support that is in cats. This shouldn't surprise anybody shocked by this, that if a cat stays in the shelter 21 days, it's almost inevitably going to get an upper respiratory, at least in this shelter, which was a very busy municipal shelter. I'm not going to say that's true for every shelter, but the truth is the longer they stay, the more likely they are to get sick. What else starts to happen with them? They get depressed. Behaviorally, too. We need to think about behavioral illness. Absolutely increases with length of stay in the shelter for many, many of our animals. They come in bright, or maybe they come in stressed and then they get a little bit better and then the depression sets in, the lethargy sets in, the bad behavior sets in. So again, it behooves us to try and get those guys through the system if we can, if it's appropriate. Get them through faster and get them on the floor and get them in a home. So there's our system, and here's our green arrows. There's a lot of information out there about trying to increase retention of pets in homes, so decreasing owner surrenders. There are a lot of webinars that are available, tons of resources, so I'm not going to focus on that a lot today. I am going to talk a little bit about strays. I'm going to talk about return to owner, and I'm going to talk about what we can do in the shelter itself. Those are going to be my areas of focus. And there's also a ton of new information on adoption, how to get animals adopted faster. If you look at PetSmart Charities, ASPCA Pro, they have a lot of things on increasing adoptions and ideas in that area. So who is responsible for flow-through planning? Who helps gets the animals? I'm talking like the cats on the picture, through the shelter system. And I'm going to tell you that it's pretty much everyone. So the medical staff needs to have an eye to what's going on with this animal, what can we do to address the medical issues, and how can we get them moving faster. The behavioral staff plays a role in that in terms of assessments, behavior modification, stress management. Certainly adoptions, because adoptions may want to look at a promotion or look at promoting a certain animal with social media. Other ways of getting them adopted faster. Operations, because they're supposed to be overseeing the entire shelter system and organism. The foster coordinator certainly needs to play a role. And I know some of you are like, wait a minute, I'm all those jobs again. Yeah, I hear it, I know. I've got a question for you later. So the foster coordinator certainly plays a role because sometimes animals do need that little detour out of the shelter, and that's the best route for them. And that does increase their length of stay, but that little detour may be life-saving. Fair enough? Intake staff plays a role because they need to know what's happening in the rest of the shelter and play a role in kind of directing traffic at the front door. And then obviously volunteers at all levels, because I am sure that in many of your shelters, volunteers are playing some of these roles. Unpaid staff are playing some of these roles. And so volunteers need to be involved in this conversation. Really, it's about everybody. This is a complete team effort, and it can't work without a team effort. So like I said, it can sometimes require a cultural shift. If your organization has been used to having animals in the shelter for a long period of time, if a 45-day length of stay for a dog doesn't seem long to you, and that's what you're used to, then it can be shocking to think about, well, how do we get them out of here faster, and why would we? Like, this is what we've always done. And we have, enough cages. Why would we want to move them faster? Because we can house them. Why would you want to hold them longer is what I say, right. Why would we want to put them under that stress? Thinking of the shelter as a system, which I've already kind of referred to, and I'll go back to that picture over and over again. Thinking of the shelter as a business. And this gets tricky. I have very little, really no business background. And I don't necessarily think like a business person. Most of us don't. We went into humane work because we care about the animals, right? Anybody here not care about animals? Okay, good. Then you're in the right room. Otherwise, I might have to send you down to the law school or something, I don't know. Or the business school, maybe. But the truth is that the organization relies on efficient financial and management practices, or else the organization can't survive. And so there is an element of really thinking about managing the shelter like a business. We are in the business of saving lives. And our product are live adoptions. They are pre-owned, certified cats, all right? And so we need to really focus on producing that product. And I don't want it to sound cold, but that is what we want. We want to see those animals in homes. Fair enough. And so we need to be smart about it and really think about what are the smart choices. How can things be done efficiently and productively to see that happen? And so it helps us to have people with a business mind involved in our shelters. Marketing is another perfect example. I am not a PR person. I am not an HR person. I am not somebody who's been working in advertising. But boy, could I use help in that arena from somebody who is. And shelters are learning this. Now we've got social media. We've got all kinds of adoption drives. We've got all kinds of people working to get messages out there or get animals profiles out there. And so that stuff is absolutely key to helping some of this flow through. All right? So it really means being proactive and actively managing that shelter, managing that population in the shelter as a system and not just focusing on each individual animal. It also takes everybody. Full staff has to be involved in this for it to be successful. So these are the strategies I'm going to talk about today. These are the things to do, all right? Yeah, I wish this guy was on my team, actually. Sometimes I feel like I need somebody from the military doing my work with me. So you need to understand your shelter's capacity, and I will define that for you, what the shelter's actual capacity is. You want to use intake protocols and procedures that are efficient and allow for screening and risk management of disease in your shelter. You want to plan their pathway through and out of the shelter the moment they come in. The moment they come in, the mindset is, all right, what things need to get done so that this animal can get out of here? Holding them should never be a goal. And obviously there are things that have to happen along the way, but you should start from the first moment. Which pathway can this animal take out of here? Daily rounds is another activity I will talk to you about today that I think for some of you may be the first start in changing the thinking and getting the communication to happen in your shelter. And then we're going to talk about setting goals and tracking success. And that Jan has already given you some goals, and I'll give you some more. So understanding capacity for care. What does that mean? From the standards, so I go back to the document, capacity, and every word is important here, capacity to provide humane care has limits for every organization, just as it does in private homes. I have 3 cats. That is all I am allowed to have. When I get above 3 cats, their level of humane care drops in my home. And most of you would agree, and we all kind of laugh about, well, what number takes you over the top? What number makes you a crazy cat lady, all right? And the number may be different depending on your personal home and your setup, but we all have our limits for where we can do a good job. And when that limit is exceeded, that's when we start talking about some nasty things like hoarding, right? So we need to know what our limits are. And no, it's humane care. It's not just a matter of food and water in a cage. When I see human bathrooms with cages in them or crates in them, and I think I have another slide, but I will speak to it now. If bathroom is a location in your computer software, that might be a sign you have a problem. I'm just going to put it out there, all right? You laugh, but I know it's true. I know it's true. So let's talk about how we define capacity for care. So most of you say, well, capacity for care is how many cages I have. Fair enough? No. Good. So it's the number of appropriate housing units when we're talking about physical capacity of your space, number of appropriate housing units. So I'm going to encourage you that a cage in the bathroom doesn't count, all right? Emergency cages don't count. And they need to be cages that are appropriate for housing animals for what your length of stay normally is. So we want to look at that. And you can go around and count them. But I would encourage you not to count anything that doesn't seem appropriate. And if you have a question, think about being the cat in that cage. The guidelines has some numbers. So we have numbers for square feet that cats should have, and it varies from 11 square feet per cat to 18 square feet per cat. Those have been pulled from various studies, from lab animal. I think sometimes the numbers aren't as useful as maybe somebody coming from the outside and saying to you, this is an appropriate cage, maybe this isn't, and I'll have some examples. Or this is an appropriate number of cats for this communal room, and when you exceed it, that's when trouble starts to happen. So you want to be realistic about it. But hard, fast numbers, people often want hard, fast numbers, and I think that can be a little bit tricky. Care capacity looks at your resources. So it looks at the number of staff that you have and volunteers that are providing direct care. It looks at how many people you have cleaning and how many hours they're engaged in cleaning. It looks at spay-neuter. If you're doing in-house spay-neuter, how many slots do you have to do that? It looks at behavior. How many hours does your behavior staff work with your animals, either doing assessments or modification? So you have to look at the services that you're offering and then look at the numbers of hours that are available. And is it appropriate for your population? And then the last one, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on because I'm not focusing on adoptions, but there is this exploration of adoption-driven capacity. And Sandra Newberry, who's actually next door, was one of the first people to talk about this in terms of trying to examine what your adoption capacity is for your community. Meaning, are they just going to keep adopting every animal that you put out? Or is there a certain number of animals that your community can adopt each year? And if you're exceeding that, what can we do about that? What can we do differently? And so it's interesting. It also gets a little bit into business and marketing with the idea that if you give people too many choices, they can get overwhelmed. And so there's this discussion of how many adoptable cats should we have on the floor at any one time, because it doesn't necessarily help you to have more choices. It's kind of like going to Wegmans when you already feel a little wiggy and stressed out. How many people have Wegmans? Most of you? No? Okay, or Walmart, Super Walmart. Super Walmart, anybody? Okay. So all you need is like cereal and milk. And you go down the cereal aisle and there's like 432 brands to choose from, and they've got sales on these 3. And you stand there and you're finally like, you know what? I don't need any cereal. I think I'll just go get milk and go home. Like too many choices can be overwhelming, and they have demonstrated this in studying business and marketing. And we do wonder if there's not an impact like that with animals. When people walk in, there's so many, there's overcrowding, and they kind of get that rush of, and then they just end up leaving. And so there is an element of looking at marketing our animals more effectively and not having everybody maybe on the floor, but it's tricky. It is tricky, and so that one, like I said, I'm not going to spend a lot more time on it, but it's an interesting area of exploration. So I'm only going to do a little bit of math with you. So here's a little bit of math. But what we do know is that the capacity of your shelter, the number of animals that you can care for at any one time, is directly related to your length of stay. So if an animal stays longer on average in your shelter, then you can have fewer animals. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right, so here's an example. So let's say you take in 10 animals a day, and they stay for 5 days each. Then your daily population, your number of animals, is generally going to be 50 animals on a given day, because they're going to stay for 5 days and then they're each going to leave after 5 days. Okay? If you take in 10 animals a day and they stay for 10 days, suddenly you're up to 100 animals a day in your shelter as the cycle moves through. Going from 50 animals to 100 animals, that can make a huge difference, eh? Yeah, that can kill an organization, I think, in time. So simply by adding 5 extra days to every animal's stay, you have doubled your population. By doubling your length of stay, you've doubled your daily population. If you have 10 animals per day, they stay for 20 days, you're at 200. So you see how it works. Now, most of the time, when I was first thinking about this, and my thanks to Dr. Sandra Newberry again, because she's the one who first taught me math when it comes to, I went to vet school and then I had to learn how to do, algebra or something. So I had to back up a little bit, but the idea, it really does work out mathematically that you end up overcrowded very quickly if your animals are staying a longer period of time. But most people will say to me, well, we can't control how many animals we're taking in. They just keep coming. They just keep coming. So telling me, what can I do? Well, what you can do is reduce that length of stay. Sometimes it's useful to think of it in the other way. To start with, how many animals can we serve humanely? What is our capacity for humane care? And if we work backwards, that tells us how many animals we can actually take in every day and care for. So if your length of stay is 5 days and you can house 100 cats, then you could actually help 20 animals a day in your community. But if your capacity is 100 and they stay for 20 days, you can only help 5 cats a day. And that's generally motivating to people who say, well, I want to help 20 cats a day in my setting. I don't want to help 5 cats a day. Well, then, you know what that means we've got to do? We've got to look at that length of stay. If your goal is to help more animals, then you've got to shorten how long they're staying in your shelter. So capacity is inversely related to length of stay, and you can impact your length of stay. That's what I'm going to preach to you, that you really, really can change how long they stay in your shelter. This is data from a shelter that we were working with, and our original goal was simply to reduce the length of stay. That was our big goal. We want these animals to stay for shorter periods of time. And my clicker's not working, my laser pointer's not working so well, but let's look at 2008, which is the brown line. And so you can see it kind of drops way down in April of 2008, goes back up, but then lingers kind of high there. Over time, as we went on to 2009, it kind of went back and forth the same as 2008. We set this goal in the May of 2010. And so the 2008-2009 data is historical. In May of 2010, we said we want to decrease the length of stay. And it was not easy. But you can see it held steady. There was no summer peak. And then it dropped in October and came down. Why is that? Why did October suddenly allow it to drop even more substantially? Yes? End of kitten season. And so our intake is coming down, which means the number of cats in the shelter is coming down. And so the length of stay of each cat is going to come down. Fair enough? And then, so you say, okay, well, you got through that, but you've got the next year then, 2011. What happened in April, that little peak right there? Kitten season, kitten explosion, right? And we thought, oh no, here we go. We're actually higher than April of last year. What's going to happen this year? But look at what happened in 2011. Because we started with a lower length of stay to begin with, we were able to actually hold it down. And again, we continued to learn and improve and perfect the strategies we were trying, along with putting in other initiatives. Because you know what happens when you have cats for shorter periods of time and you have a lower daily census, you have fewer animals in the shelter, you actually do have time to maybe do some planning or some thinking. Or some organizing, or some staff training. So all of those other elements suddenly have time because you have fewer animals that you're running around trying to care for on a daily basis. You're not serving fewer animals. They're just staying for less time, and therefore you have fewer animals on any given day. And this is the real data from that shelter on the average daily census of cats. How many cats do we have in the shelter? And so as you can see, nice slow drop over time. 2010 stayed low, and then 2011 we managed to really keep that capacity lower simply by moving them faster. So let's go back to physical capacity, appropriate caging, because I love this topic. So again, not just, you can't just go through and count cages. So how many of you have cages like this? Some 2x2s, yeah, pretty small, fair enough? Especially if you're housing the cats for anything longer than a few days, I would argue. Really kind of designed even as surgical recovery cages. They've got the 3 tiers. They're challenging. How much do they cost? Anybody know what a bank of cages costs?
They're really expensive.
Super expensive. I quiz the vet students on this. I love to do that. And this particular, but a bank of 4x4, just 4 cages, 2x2, I should say, but 4 cage bank. Somebody give me a number. Who's had to? $1,200. I'd take it higher. I'd take it higher. I just priced them $3,600 for stainless steel bank of 4 cages, slightly larger than these cages, but still, seriously, $3,600. So what if I just walk into your shelter and say, these cages are too small, you need to get bigger cages? Who's able to do that tomorrow? Because I want to come talk to your shelter. All right. Most people are like, there's nothing we can do. And so were we in the shelter we were working with. We're not going to be able to buy all new caging units. But it's kind of critical that these cages in particular were in the isolation ward for upper respiratory disease in the cats. So how long are those cats going to linger in the shelter? At least. Couple of weeks, fair enough. 2 weeks, 10 to 14 days. If they actually have blown with an upper respiratory and they're going into isolation and we're treating them, it's going to be a 10 to 14 day course. So there are sickest cats, there are most stressed cats, they're staying there already for 2 weeks, and they're in our crappiest cages. We're in a bad situation, fair enough? So what do we do about that? Oh no, hold on, there's my, okay, don't put them in the bathroom. Don't do that. We don't do this. Okay, we don't put them in the bathroom, we don't overflow, we don't stack them. We do this, which might be hard to see, but I have a close-up on the next one. So we put portholes through. Has anybody done this in their shelter? Yeah, you can't raise your hand because I was there. Okay, a couple of others. So we put portholes in these cages to open them up to give the cats essentially 2 cages, to give them more space. And one way to do that, let me skip ahead a little bit, is right there. So it does take a little bit of, it took us a little bit of work to find a machinist with a plasma cutter who would cut the holes. But it was done entirely with this one guy who volunteered to cut the holes and the facilities guy who transported the cages to him. You can have a plasma cutter come into your shelter. It can be a little tricky because of the power that they need and all of that. But you take their fancy plasma cutter and carve a porthole, and then PVC plastic piping put in there. There's directions for this online at the UC Davis website, and I have the address at the end of the presentation. They have step-by-step directions, and Dr. Jeanette Wagner out at Davis is really the person who kind of figured out all the nooks and crannies of this, although she's always looking for new suggestions. And then you can make fun covers to put over them. This is a dollar store placemat. I thought it was hilarious that the interns managed to find like leopard print or whatever that is. But you can make them out of all sorts of things. I think this has won the contest as the best looking porthole cover. And it slides right over the top of the porthole. It doesn't fix on there really firmly. Why? We just want it to keep the cats over there while we clean. We don't want to be able to use it to divide the cages again, all right? We want it to be temporary. And so the idea is you put the porthole on there so that you don't have to remove the animal from the cage to clean. And then you can clean the cage without taking them out, because what happens every time we take a cat with an upper respiratory out of its cage and snuggle it and put it in a carrier to clean its cage? You are a rainbow of disease. Rainbow of disease, all right? And it stresses the cat out. Completely stresses them out. So this way they stay in their cages while we clean. We simply put them to one side. And what else can we do once we remove the porthole and we put them in their extra large deluxe cage? Yeah, it's easier to keep them cleaner because their litter box and their food are separated. There's more room for hide boxes. There's more room for all the things we know they like when it comes to stress management. And this ran us about $150 per unit to do. So much cheaper than buying new cages or buying condominiums. Because if you guys have priced those can be really shocking. I think my house cost less than some of those condominium setups. In fact, I know it did, although I question the humane housing that is happening in my house currently. All right, so this is an actual capacity assessment for one of the shelters we were working with that had been done by the shelter management prior to our arrival. So we said to them, how many animals can actually be housed in these units? And so in cat holding, he went through, he was very, very detail-oriented and meticulous about this, kind of went through the small cages, medium cages, large cages, looked at recommended occupancy, and then the maximum. Note, recommended and maximum. So already I'm ignoring the maximum category. And then figured out capacity by room. And so did it by cats and kittens. So went through and calculated, and these wire cages are dog crates, opened up dog crates. So those were counted in the assessment, and we were at somewhere in the line of 80 something, I think, total with that. So we were looking at cat holding, infirmary 1, which was isolation 1, upper respiratory, and at that point there were 2 isolation wards for cats with upper respiratory, because there were a lot of them. I went through And on a particular steamy afternoon in May of 2010, started taking apart any dog crates that had no animals in them and hiding them. So I took them away. And then tried to look at, these small cages are the ones we put portholes in. So I said, too small, we need a porthole in these cages. The wire cages we put away, and just started crossing things out. And you can see the capacity calculation dropped tremendously in that. So what's your worry now? What did the staff say to me? We're not going to have enough room for these animals. There's going to be cages. We're just going to have to put those crates back up. Why are you taking them down? That's a real fear, and I can see it on your faces. We're not going to have any cages for these animals. How are we going to fix that? We need to keep them for a shorter length of stay. Okay? And we've just got to focus on that. That has to be the goal. So in the back of my head, I'll be honest with you, I was a little worried too. I'm like, I really hope I don't have to go get those cages back out of the closet. But let's see what we can do in the meantime. If it's not sitting there, then it's not convenient, right? Then the feeling gets to be, okay, this room is full. Who can we, what do we need to do today to get these animals moving towards adoption? Sometimes it takes drastic measures. So this is an older bank of cages, and that was a cage up in the top right corner. It was probably about 16 inches wide and maybe 20 inches deep. Like, what is that a cage for in this bank? Like, yeah.
That's what they are.
What is that? What is that for? Like, why not make the top 3 wider? I didn't get that. Like, that's not really. It's not like we're putting hamsters up there. So, what did I do? I took the door off. How many of you have done this? Yep. That's okay. Be proud. Be proud. I took the door off and I threw it away. It was gone. Like, you can put the bottle of trifectin up there, or the hand sanitizer, that sounds nice, or the newspapers, or storage, but you can't put an animal in there, and I'm gonna take the door off so that that doesn't happen again. And I encourage you to do the same. There's goal for tomorrow, Monday. Take doors off things and hide them. All right, care capacity. So again, the actual math for this is to look at the time it takes to care for an animal in minutes, times that by your number of animals, and that gives you your total number of minutes required for care. And then you look at your number of staff and how many minutes of staff time you have for actual hands-on. So it needs to be their time they actually spend with the animals, and figure out if you have enough people caring for them. On average, the recommendations, and again, I don't like some of these numerical recommendations because I think it really varies depending on the way that they're housed and how much you have volunteers interacting with your animals and socializing them. But on average, the old HSUS recommendations were 15 minutes per animal per day. That seems kind of short to me, especially if you want to take into account socialization, but that was their guideline. And so I don't know that I can give you firm numbers, but at least if you figure it out, you start to get an idea. Wow. In the height of kitten season, we have 2 minutes per animal of staff time. Well, no wonder protocols are falling through the cracks. No wonder everybody's stressed out. No wonder the animals are sick. How many have noticed that when those kittens start coming through the door, suddenly you've got more sickness in your shelter, even in other animals? Absolutely. And it's not just the stress of that overcrowding, it's the stress on your staff. Because they're not paying attention, they're not cleaning their hands, they're not changing gloves. Because they're stressed out about getting through all those animals, and so it absolutely impacts. Are you meeting basic needs? Do you have time for enrichment needs for your animals that are stressed out or developing behavioral issues? And are there differences throughout your system? Are the animals on the adoption floor worked with a nice period of time? They've got enrichment and volunteers and walks all day, but the animals in your holding building or in your rescue area, or your animals that are being in the infirmary, do they have very little time? Are you kind of skipping on those guys because they're kind of behind the door? And so you do want to kind of compare things through your system. And then the guidelines, I already kind of talked about that. So here's a way to go through your shelter and your shelter system and start to self-assess without having to call somebody to come in. So you can begin a self-assessment to try and decrease this length of stay. And one way to do that is to start to look at the strategies that you use. So this Flowbee, can you guys read that in the center? How many people were alive in the 70s? All right, good. Yeah, we can all confess. Okay, so we were alive in the 70s. How many people remember the Flowbee? Anybody? Okay, so the Flowbee, and it's still available, so if you're interested, you can still order it online. So the Flowbee was a vacuum cleaner attachment that you hooked up to your head that would cut your hair. So you turn the vacuum on and it would suck. Yep, people are nodding, and it would give you a home haircut. All right? Now, what does this have to do with shelter medicine? I am not encouraging you to use the Flowbee to groom your animals or yourself. But I have to come up with things to entertain myself. And so I was thinking about flow-through planning, and I was thinking about, what do we call the person who's really focused on this, whose job it is to not allow the rest of us to slack? And Flowbee came to mind, and I was like, Flowbee, really? But bees, they're industrious. Sometimes they're a little annoying. They get a lot done. They're very efficient in their work system. And Flowbee kind of fit. And then I cracked myself up with the picture. So I apologize, but there it is. So the tagline is be a Flowbee. And with any luck, one of you may be the Flowbee in your organization. And it really is there, I swear. You're looking at me like I'm crazy, but people buy them. People buy them, and then they end up on late night TV. All right. So one of the things that we can do to keep animals for a shorter length of stay in our shelter is maybe not to have them come into our shelter. Are there other options for this owner with this animal in our community that could turn them around and help them keep their animal? Give me a example of something that would be an appropriate strategy to helping somebody keep their animal. Yes, ma'am. Education. So can you give me something more specific?
Like educating the person, not a box.
Yep. So that's an excellent example. Is there something we can do to educate that client to help them keep their cat who's not using a litter box appropriately? So what does that take for your organization? You can't just simply say to the person, take the cat back and here's a litter box. Are you using the litter box? Take the cat back. All right, so what do we need? What kind of time is it going to take? Who needs to do that in your organization? Who needs to do it? You do it. Okay. The intake person, so it may mean training your intake person to talk to people about that, or training your intake person to go get the appropriate staff member. If you have somebody who does behavior, or somebody who's really good at cat behavior, you need to engage a staff member. So it means you're still committing time, right? You're committing time and energy to it, but your goal is to keep that cat with that owner who does love it, but is fed up. And maybe they've tried all the strategies, but chances are they probably haven't. And so you may have some strategies to help them really keep their pet. Good. What's another example other than behavioral? Yes. Good. How many of you have some sort of food bank, food pantry system? I love that. I love that plan, because if they've fallen on hard times and they love their animal and they're concerned enough that they're bringing it in because they're worried they can't feed that animal, and we have an option for them to keep their pet and we can help them feed their pet, that to me is a perfect scenario. And wow, we've just kept that animal or all of those animals out of a shelter. So we've helped ourselves, we've helped them, we've helped that animal. I mean, it's a beautiful thing. What else? Yes, ma'am. Perfect. So we're seeing this in more and more communities, and it's one of my personal passions, honestly, is medical care. People who cannot afford some of the basic medical care they need to keep that pet. If your shelter, some shelters operate a clinic, or they have a relationship with a clinic, where they can offer opportunities for wellness care, vaccinations, and even some more advanced medical care at a subsidized cost. And it's important to realize that is subsidized, because the clinic is subsidizing the care of that animal. The shelter is subsidizing. It's not that it costs less overall, it's just that that is a commitment of the organization, is to help provide that medical care, to keep that animal with what is a loving owner in a good situation. And I love to see that model in place. A lot of shelters don't have that necessarily, and I understand that. And some communities aren't as friendly towards that sort of effort. But personally, I think that that is a direction that we're going to see shelters having to go in, because the cost of veterinary care is so high. And I feel like human health care, we're seeing this separation between essentially the haves and the have-nots when it comes to it. And the shelters are ending up taking on the burden of that animal's care anyway. And so we're taking on the care of that animal anyway when it enters our shelter. What if it's already in a really loving home? And they can do some of that, and we can do some of that. I love to see that scenario, so thank you. That's a great example. Any other examples?
We
Yes.
actually hang a list of pet-friendly apartments.
Perfect. So knowing the pet-friendly apartments and housing options in your community, really, really good example. Because a lot of times people move, and I know some communities in this area in particular have really fallen on hard times with housing, with the fracking and people that have come in from outside, and they're getting evicted out of their homes and then can barely find housing for themselves, never mind their animals. And so that's really useful. For a model for that too, if you go to the Richmond ASPCA website, they've been very active at looking at pet-friendly housing in their community, and they have all the examples of the sorts of things they've come up with online. So you can actually get a book about that online. Yes?
Something that goes along with the housing is that a lot of times it might.
And so sometimes it's a matter of helping people to realize that if you're in a situation with a disability of some sort, that getting a physician to become active in that, getting your doctor involved in that, so that if you are having to move to new apartments or to travel or have some sort of pet situation set up, that you can actually, your pet can be included in that, and so therefore you don't lose your housing or you don't have to give up your animal. Absolutely. And so sometimes it means enlisting other resources in the community as well, including doctors, physicians, and counselors of some variety. Sometimes it's enlisting the housing, some housing agencies, advocates for people. Absolutely. Good. Anything else? Yes?
People who keep their pet.
Perfect. And so it may mean engaging other volunteers in the community or some of your foster owners or people on your staff to provide essentially a temporary support system when an owner has become ill or incapacitated and needs help for a particular limited period of time. And sometimes those animals can come into your shelter too. If you do need, if it's in a public assist sort of situation, so maybe you need to essentially board them for a short period of time to allow someone to find a better situation.
And on the same allowed to do is even touch the living.
Interesting. So did everyone hear that?
Something that you need to
So if you are home,
know somebody.
if you are home and receiving in-home health care, it may mean that your health care is provided for, but the home health aide cannot necessarily clean your litter box, or they may be, I've certainly seen instances where they're afraid of dogs. And so even having the dog in the home can interfere with some of this hospice care or home care. And so again, it may mean a short term, but these are all things that may be short-term problems that would allow that owner to keep their pet long-term. So let's go back to what does this require then of your organization? It requires time for that intake person or the behavioral person, whoever is engaged in that conversation. It involves training, because these are big problems, right? And how many of you are interested in counseling people on an hourly basis? How many of you do counsel people on an hourly basis? Yeah, I mean, the truth is you may have gotten into this line of work because you care about animals, but you absolutely are going to deal with people day in, day out, minute by minute. And so there's got to be an element of working with the people. So it's going to involve counseling people. It's going to involve time. And I'm going to argue it involves space. And in our shelters, a lot of times, the surrender desk, where people bring animals in, is like a tiny little countertop. It's like the dingiest part of the shelter at times, right? A place where nobody wants to linger, no one wants to work there. They all want to work at the prettier adoption area if you've got them separated, or you're trying to do them at the same desk, and you've got the same person trying to do both, which can be extraordinarily difficult. Yeah, you guys are laughing, I know you know it. So you got one person over here who's like crying, surrendering their cat, who you might be able to help if you actually had time, but over here you've got an entire family that's dancing around with a crazy Labrador they're trying to adopt, right? And so who gets the attention? Well, the adopter gets the attention, and the crying person, you're just like, oh, here's another person like surrendering their cat. All right, sign the dotted line, see ya. When we could have engaged that person and maybe prevented the animal even being in that box, that shelter box. And so think about your surrender spaces. And I know, again, we can't get too fancy and we've got limited resources, but it really helps to have your surrender space be someplace where some of this counseling, this conversation can occur, and where there's a smidgen of privacy, because they may reveal to you something that the shelter can help them with. that could change that entire dynamic. We just talked about all this. So we can go right through that because you guys are much better than I am. TNR, that's the only other one I don't think we got to. TNR programs, I always like if people are bringing in a mom and a litter of kittens, or just a litter of kittens. You're like, oh, that's a nice litter of kittens. Where's mom? Oh, she's at home with dad. All right, what might we want to do in that situation if we have the ability to do it? Spay and neuter. And I'll do it, subsidized cost, free, whatever it's going to take if we can figure out a system. Spay your mama is what I like to call it. And we do a couple of those clinics every spring. Spray your mama. You bringing to me the babies, we need that mom spayed out there. And so that's another way to kind of turn it around.
You also need the males done because
Yeah.
spraying inside the house, people will give up their cats because of it.
They will. So I don't want to discriminate against the males. We can get them in there too. But spay your mama sounds fancier, doesn't it? All right. How many of you made it to Emily Weiss's lecture yesterday on Pet ID? Okay, good. So most of you were there, so I don't need to spend too much time because I'm sure she talked about this. But I really, really think along with our shelters becoming community resources for food pantries and access to veterinary services, including spay-neuter, and helping people in terms of public assist, we really, really need to be the voice of Pet ID. Animals can't say where they came from, and don't tell me your animal never goes outside, because how many of you, and you guys are all responsible, loving pet owners, how many of you have lost a pet, even for a short period of time? How does it happen? All sorts of ways. They're ungrateful little creatures, right? Ungrateful. They break out the screen, they slip out the door, they jump out of the car, they get out of their carrier when you're taking them somewhere, they break the leash. All of these things happen. They're ungrateful and they run off. They cannot, will not find their way their home at times, and that's just unacceptable to me. So please, I really encourage people to send animals out wearing a collar and tag if you're able to do it, or write a grant so you can send them out wearing a collar or tag, because they'll retain it, and Emily has demonstrated that out in Oklahoma. Microchipping, really important. I'd rather see you raise your adoption fee and send them with a microchip than not send them with a microchip. And yes, microchips aren't perfect, but they are better than nothing. Collars and tags are fantastic, but sometimes they fall off, right? My cat loves to pop his little ducky collar and then run around naked, and it's unacceptable. All right, so quiz question, and I did not use the clickers because I was too afraid of the multiple pieces of technology I'm working on right now. So we're going to do a show of hands because you guys are brave. On average, what is the approximate percentage of stray cats entering shelters that get returned to their owners? So how many people think it's less than 2%? How many people think it's 10%? How many people think it's 20%? How about 40%? How about more than 50%? It is less than 2%. Less than 2% of stray cats coming into a shelter get returned to their owner. So if they're wearing a collar and tag, how quickly can they get returned to their owner? Maybe they can even avoid the shelter, right? If they've got a microchip, they're going to have to hit a shelter or a veterinary hospital, or maybe just the animal control officer's truck if they're really progressive and animal control is carrying a microchip scanner. And so they can get scanned in the field and returned to their owners. So please think about Pet ID and think about what role your shelter could play in it. How can you encourage people to put a collar and tag on their animal? Let's talk about microchips because they're not perfect. They're not perfect, and there's lots of problems with them, but they're better than not having a microchip. So when microchipped, what approximate percentage of stray cats entering shelters get returned to their owners? So when they are microchipped, how many people say less than 2%? How about 5%? 5. How about 20%? How about 40%? How about more than 50? Good. The 40%ers have it. 40%. 40% of them, if they are microchipped. I think that's actually low because I say to myself, well, what's going on with the microchip? So if they've got a microchip in them, why is it not 100%? Because their address changed, they didn't update their data, it was never registered. So my message here is, and most of you, if you're using PetPoint, that means you're using the microchips from PetPoint, and it automatically registers them in the computer, right? So when somebody adopts an animal, that microchip is automatically registered to that adopter. Those microchips should be registered. That should be part of the process. And so if an adopter, if the animal has a microchip, and if it's a microchip they came in with, then help them. Call the company and get registered. Because you know what happens when they get home and they've got this piece of paper that says, I need to register my animal? The same thing that would happen with mine. Like, it doesn't get done. It doesn't get done. Then the animal gets lost, and then you call home again, and they're like, oh, it's an unregistered microchip. Frustrating, right? Super frustrating. I'll tell one brief line that there was actually a cat owned here by the teaching hospital, owned by the vet school, that got lost and had an unregistered microchip. And they called me because they were like, well, you know, it's got a microchip, so it must be from the shelter. And I was like, well, no, because we automatically register our microchips. So what's the number? And we traced it, and by the next morning, it was determined that, sure, it belonged to the teaching hospital. Well, I'm happy to say it wasn't just my head that exploded. There was a variety of clinicians involved in that process that were like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And so the cat, it's registered now. Proactive management of strays. All right, so what are we going to do about our strays? Because they're coming in. How many of you take in stray animals? Because I know not all organizations do. So this is relevant to quite a few of you. So you take in the stray animal, you have a legal stray hold for dogs or cats. And so you say, well, what are we going to do? That's automatically 5 days added to our length of stay, or 3 days, or whatever it may be, or 10 days added to our length of stay. So, you know, that's already going to clog up our shelter. There's nothing we can do about that. But the truth is shelters are looking at proactive ways to deal with that. And one is, if you really have a lot of strays, and your return to owner for strays is pretty low, like our 1 to 2% of cats, then the idea is that you might want to take your adoptable strays and actually make them visible to your public. And there are different strategies for doing this. You probably don't want them walking through what is your holding area, but maybe you actually get them on the floor or get them on the website, put them in the public eye with a sign that says, like me, I'll be available on whatever day. And you know what gets people more interested than a sign that says, like me, I'll be available on whatever day? Not much. Like if they're told, oh, there's that cute dog, but I can't have it yet, that's the one they want. Like, that's it. Never mind that its twin sister is right over here. They want that one. They want the stuff in the back room, right? So this can be really helpful if your problem is you've got a lot of strays that are waiting out a long stray hold and you can't affect that necessarily. Certainly it's worthwhile looking. The other thing that makes me crazy is stray litters of puppies and kittens. When's the last time 6 puppies all strayed off together and went marching down the road? Like, I don't see it. That's not stray. And so some communities have been effective at having that legislation changed so that litters of puppies and kittens aren't seen as stray and are automatically available rather than being held for a stray hold. Certainly, you can also look at performing behavioral evaluations during stray hold. If that's one of the places that you're getting backed up, maybe you actively go ahead and perform those evaluations, those assessments, especially if your behavior person's only coming in a couple days a week. And so either it has to get done today or it's going to be another 10 days till it gets done. So you may want to do some of those, particularly on your adoptable animals. And then vaccinating the strays at intake, which I'll talk about. Even in vaccinating the strays, don't wait until the stray hold is over to start treating them medically, because that's too late, because they've brought the disease into your shelter. Identifying the bottlenecks. You each need to think about your own shelter and identify what those bottlenecks are. Where is it that animals get held up? And then actively work to decrease. In just one day at each spot can make a huge difference. And each one animal can make a huge difference in the overall length. And so you really want to think about where are they getting stuck? So you tell me, where do they get stuck in our system before hitting adoption? Spay neuter. Waiting for spay neuter is probably a big one. I see a ton of nodding heads, especially this time of year. Fair enough? Because we have so many. All right, so spay neuter is a big one. What else? I'm sorry? Illness, absolutely. If they get sick, we've automatically increased the length of stay for those animals. And so we need to decrease the sickness or figure out how to treat them more effectively, perhaps. If they get sick and they have to wait for the day the vet comes in, that adds time, right? So we need to think about how can we set it up so that animals get treated faster. Now, granted, it's going to take them the same amount of time to recover in most cases. There's limits on what we control there. But time to diagnosis and time to start of treatment may be able to be affected. What else?
Animals that need behavior modification.
Good. Behavior assessment or behavior modification. So they are animals that are going to need some work in the behavior department. Fair enough. What strategies can we use to do that? Good. And I will talk about a couple of those. Any other spots? Length of stay, because you're essentially backed up to the adoption floor. So you've got this number of cages on the adoption floor and they're full. And so maybe the animals are just backed up waiting to get there. Good. Let me see. I think you hit it all. Stray holds we'd already talked about. Waiting for intake exams has been one. How many of you have a system where your animals get examined by somebody, medical staff member, when they come? It doesn't have to be a veterinarian, when they come in the door, or at least the same day, within a matter of hours. Okay, good. So I'm preaching to the choir on this one. Really important. Medical evaluations, behavior evaluations, spay, neuter, illness, foster, and movement to adoption floor. So you guys got it all. I don't need to be here. I can take a break. All right. So adoption bottlenecks. Again, this is an adoption lecture, but if your adoption area is always full with animals waiting to hit, then adoption is your bottleneck. And so you probably want to go watch some of those adoption webinars, since I'm not going to focus on it, on really proactive strategies for moving animals to adoption faster. So can you increase adoptions? Are they ready to go? One of the other things that can happen is you put animals on the adoption floor and they're still waiting for spay neuter, and then some shelters don't send them home because they're waiting for spay neuter, and so you end up with like this extra 5 days while they wait for the vet to come in. But they're already adopted. That can be a really frustrating bottleneck, I think. It is for me. Because what I want to do is at 10 o'clock at night spay that cat so it can get out the door. Don't call me. Do you have enough of the right people working adoption, and are you in the ballpark? So there are things to think about with that. Intake exams, and most of you raised your hand, you're doing them early. They can be absolutely life-saving. And there are things that should be a part of that intake exam to save that animal's life. How many of you are vaccinating on intake? Okay, good. Most of you. I would encourage you, all of you should be vaccinating animals for our most common infectious diseases on intake with a modified live vaccine. So that means modified live FVRCP or modified live canine distemper. Why do I keep emphasizing modified live? What other option is there? Killed. So we've got 2 types of vaccine. Modified live is faster. It is much faster to protective immunity, and you need fast. Killed vaccines can take 2 doses, 2 weeks apart, so 30 days to be affected. Where do you want that animal to be in 30 days? Not in your shelter, all right? So we need a modified live vaccine on intake. It makes a difference. If you are effecting a cultural shift, it should bother people. It should bother people on your staff if those animals aren't getting vaccinated when they've come through the door or almost immediately following. That should gnaw at them. They should feel guilty if they go home and the animals have not been vaccinated with their modified live FVRCP or distemper. Here's my Catholic upbringing coming in. You see the guilt? Yeah. You should feel guilty. You want that animal to stay healthy. It needs to be vaccinated before you leave. Yes?
I just want to know, can anybody could do it or just the vet?
It's a good question. Yep. It depends on the practice guidelines in your state. And so it can be a little tricky. I will say that for the health and welfare of the animals, it needs to be done by a trained medical staff member in your community, in your shelter. It does not necessarily need to be a veterinarian in most instances. In fact, I don't know of anybody that actually requires a vet. There have been some states that have been playing with the LVT practice guidelines to try and make it difficult. And then the other thing that figures into that, without getting into it too much, is that any owner can buy a dog distemper vaccine, breeders do it all the time, and vaccinate their own animals at home. And so then the discussion has been, well, shelters own the animals. So really anybody should be able to vaccinate them. That doesn't always hold up. There's a lot of back and forth with the language. I am not a lawyer, and I am saying it needs to be done by a trained staff member on intake at your shelter. And you need to train people how to handle vaccines, and this is not a vaccine lecture, but how to handle them appropriately, how to administer them appropriately. Yeah.
You're saying distemper, is it the DA2PP or is it just distemper?
DHPP or DA2PP. Yeah.
New York State doesn't allow you to give rabies though, so you have to wait. Until
Yes, New York State does not allow you to give rabies. Now, what we're talking about is wanting to decrease length of stay for illness, right? We vaccinate to protect against infectious disease. What are the chances of an animal getting exposed to rabies in our shelter? Has it happened?
Better be low.
It's really low, but it has happened. There was an instance, it was either last year or the year before, of 2 dogs getting rabies. I think it was in the Dakotas, and it was published in the shelter. They determined it happened while they were in the shelter. But that is extremely low. So honestly, when it comes to the health of the animals, rabies is lower on my list. Rabies is lower on my list. Now, if it's a bottleneck in your shelter because the animals can't get on the adoption floor or they can't go home because they're waiting for a vet, then that's a problem. LVTs can administer rabies vaccinations in New York State under the supervision or direct supervision of a veterinarian. So again, there maybe you need an LVT who's in more frequently, and they need to talk with a veterinarian about their arrangement.
Just to clarify, and I'm sorry if I'm getting off track, but
Yeah.
the vet has to be there.
Direct supervision, yes. Officially, if you read it, it's direct supervision in New York State. So it may mean, and we can talk about this a little bit more when I get to spay neuter, because that's when I talk about veterinary resources. It may mean looking at creative ways to have veterinarians, getting more veterinarians on board who are willing to swing by for an hour, 2 days a week, because all they have to do is come walk in the building, basically.
Just be there.
They have to be there, and so you may have to look at creative scheduling to get that done. There are very few exceptions. All animals should get a modified live vaccination on entry to the shelter. Yes? Our recommendation when it comes to kittens and puppies are younger than what we do in private practice. So we will vaccinate as young as 4 weeks of age for both dog distemper and parvo, so DHPP and FVRCP. Yep, 4 weeks of age. Yes, and I agree with that. Bordetella vaccines also at intake. I don't tend to write it as hard. It's hard to get people to do, but absolutely. A Bordetella intranasal at intake is a great part of your intake protocol, as well as an exam, because you really need to have somebody who's trained, and again, it doesn't have to be a veterinarian, doesn't necessarily have to be an LVT, but somebody who's trained on screening that animal for common infectious diseases and examining them. All right? And I would say screening tests, well, they include all sorts of things. The physical exam is the most important one. Looking for lesions, looking for signs of illness, determining gender, determining age, knowing how to read the aging with teeth and with eyes, those sorts of things, and looking for health problems that they can then bring to the attention of the veterinarian or the medical staff. And I would argue that a Woods lamp, and this is not a ringworm lecture, thank God, but how many of you caught the Maddie's Institute webinar on ringworm Thursday night?
Oh, not Thursday. We had it before.
Not many of you. All right. You need to watch it. If you are bringing in cats, if you have any sort of cat shelter, which I'm assuming a lot of you do, it was on Maddie's Institute. It was taped. I don't know when it's going to go live on the recording is going to go live on the website. But you absolutely want to watch it, and that will teach you everything you need to know about protecting your shelter against ringworm. Because it's not just about treatment, it's about prevention. It's about screening lesions when they come through the door and knowing what to do with them. All right, so put that on your list of things to do. Maddie's Institute webinar on ringworm.
How can you vaccinate DCO dogs on intake?
We do. You can vaccinate animal control dogs, absolutely. Strays that are brought into your facility, you may vaccinate them. And they should get an exam and they should get screened. Yep, you can't take them to surgery,
A way
but
that we do that and a way that we circumvent the cost for that, because it does, is we look at it and say, how much do we pay per dosage, and then we charge the redeemer that fee.
so in terms of cost, you can turn that cost around and try to charge the person when they pick the animal up. That's one way to do it. But I would also argue with you that it's a lot more expensive to bring a stray animal into your facility who's not getting, and then they end up not getting reclaimed, and you haven't vaccinated them, and now 5 days later they're getting sick, and I don't care whether they're going through your shelter system or then getting claimed by the owner. That cost is significantly more than the cost of a vaccination when you actually look at it in the big picture. You are vaccinating everyone at intake because they're part of its system, and you are looking to keep the health of the system. Okay? And so it's worth the money to vaccinate your strays and then do your best to turn it around and charge them for it. If they pick up their animal, congratulations, your animal got an. And what kills me is they come and pick them up and you're like, okay, it got a vaccine and it had a wound and we treated that and we did all this. And they're like, oh. I'm like, you just got a free vet exam. Like, it may be cheaper to lose your animal and come get it. I'm not for that.
We actually had people say that to us.
I've also had people complain that I treated their animal, which again blows my mind. I'm like, here's a bottle of Clevomox and thank you. But you know, I don't have to tell you. You know. Create accurate pet descriptions. This is an important part of the intake. Make sure that you've got an accurate pet description for your website and your lost animals and your Craigslist postings or whatever you're doing. Make sure the female dog is a female dog. The male cat is a male cat. Like, try to get that stuff accurate, and that means you have to look at them. You have to examine them. Now, granted, I know there are going to be some aggressive animals you can't. That's a separate issue. But for the majority of your animals, they should be examined for this reason. And risk factors. So we've already talked about that. The point of the intake exam is to have somebody looking for those lesions and those issues that you want to intervene on, and then start planning their pathway out. So we talk about fast track and slow track. I like to talk about sprinters and distance runners because the slow track reminds me of like the slow reading group in grammar school or something. Like, everybody knew what that was. So we have sprinters and distance runners, both of which are great athletic, endeavors. The sprinters, who might be your highly adoptable sprinters that you can get out of the shelter super fast? Small dogs, puppies, kittens, right? Probably kittens until about August, and then they start piling up. But they're highly adoptable. There's no problem in saying, this small dog, if I get him on the floor, tomorrow, this small dog's going to go. And if you've got time limits, focus on those guys. It doesn't mean you ignore your distance runners, your older animals, your slightly less adoptable animals. But if you quickly move the sprinters along, then you have the time to focus on those distance guys. They just need a little bit more work to get to the adoption floor. But they're both, good athletes. Proactive health management. So make sure that you have appropriate housing. And this is usually when people start looking around going, well, the bathroom, I have an extra room in the bathroom. No, do not use your bathroom for isolation. But you need to separate your sick animals into isolation. Isolation is not the same as quarantine. You need to have a space to put animals that may have been exposed to disease but aren't showing signs. So you might need to think about a quarantine facility. You need to separate your species. Please, dogs separate from cats. Even those small animals need to be separated from cats, we hope. It's hard sometimes, I know that. And separate by ages. So the babies should be in one spot separate from the adults in terms of infectious disease, even if it's just a separation of, some type of divider, but some way of thinking so people aren't going from a cage with a litter of puppies to the adult dog next to them and back to puppies. Try to provide separation. Enrichment areas. You want to provide enrichment in your holding areas, even though they're often the less attractive places, and it may not be where you want all of your volunteers going, but the truth is that those animals need enrichment as well. So somebody needs to be back there providing them socialization. And then we were talking about the fact that maybe the vet only comes 2 days a week. Do those animals have to sit and wait for the vet to get treatment? No, let's have protocols in place. So have some protocols for your most common infectious diseases. Ask your veterinary support to help you with that. If an animal starts coughing or sneezing, what should happen next? And that should be able to happen even without a vet in the building. Diarrhea is another one. Sure, there's lots of serious diseases, but the truth is that when an animal breaks with diarrhea, the staff members should know exactly what to do and if there are any treatments they can start. All right, so have those things in place already. Behavior evaluations, really planning their time. Sometimes getting them done during stray hold helps, and you want to make sure you have enough behavior hours, or you need to look at figuring that in. You guys have been so great that I'm actually going to run a little short on time, so I'm going to move to daily rounds and we're going to play a game. So, daily rounds, what is it? I think it's probably the most important thing that you guys can do would be to start daily rounds. It is a sacred period of time when key members of your staff get together and walk through the shelter and stand in front of every cage and talk about that animal. Now, you're thinking, we do not have time for that, right? I know you are. And that's exactly what people tell me every time. I promise you that this will improve your efficiency and your communication. It will be painful, but it is the most important thing I believe you can do to decrease the length of stay and improve the health of your animals, hands down. So you're going to get together, sacred time. It is not medical rounds. It is not inventory. It is not a staff meeting for complaining. All right? It is dedicated sacred time. So medical, you have somebody from medical, somebody from behavior, somebody from operations, maybe somebody from foster, maybe somebody from adoption, or maybe you're all of those. So it may only be 2 people who do all of these jobs. But you get together and you walk through the shelter. When you stand in front of the cage, you ask 5 questions. Who are you for that animal? What condition are you in? What do you need right now to improve that condition? What is the plan for you? And what can we do today to facilitate that plan? What can we do right now to make this happen faster? And the questions will be on the next ones because I'm going to flip to the game. But that's the skinny. We're going to skip this. I was going to ask you who. So patient number 1, here we are. Here's our patient. So I gave you, let's pretend this is a cage card because the first question is, who are you? And there should be a cage card, identification on the cage. How many of you sometimes have animals in cages that don't have cage cards? Does that bother you? Because it should. All right, it should make you crazy. So this is a 2-year-old domestic short hair female spayed owner surrendered cat. What condition is she in? Very, very stressed. We agree that this cat doesn't look like it's going to do well right now. What does she need? Let's give her a hide box. How long is that going to take?
12 seconds.
Like 12 seconds. I tend to be crazy. Like I stand there and I start looking for the closest box that somebody piled somewhere. But let's get her a box. Boom. All right, what else? What's her plan? She's owner surrendered. She's already spayed. Yeah, she could actually be up for adoption. Does she look like she's quite ready for that yet? No. So she might need some socialization. She definitely needs a hide box. Maybe it's this cage and where she is. Maybe this cage is right next to our dog ward and there's barking, 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 barking going on. If we moved her to a quieter spot, maybe even to the adoption floor with a, limited in the back or somewhere where she's not in the public, she might actually do better. So let's strategize real fast on what we can do for this cat. The plan is that she's actually ready for adoption on many levels, but the stress needs to be managed. And then what can we do today to facilitate that plan? An action list. People come with their little pad of paper and they write down their task. What are they going to do for this cat today? And it's probably one person who needs to take action. How about these guys? Patient number 2. Who are they? A litter of stray kittens. All right, litter of stray kittens. They've been here 5 days. Let's say not even that. What condition are they in? Yeah, they look pretty healthy. What do they need? They need spay, neuter, and get out of here. All right, so how quickly can we do that? If we're having trouble with making sure we have veterinary services, don't always just look at your veterinary hours. Remember that high-volume spay-neuter surgeons need 2 to 3, and I'm going to argue 3 support staff. So your vet may be a lot more efficient if you simply gave them one more person to work with, if they had one more person to delegate to. And so when you're strategizing on your veterinary services, it can really be helpful to think about how to make that vet more efficient in surgery rather than necessarily having to increase vet hours. Now, maybe you do need to increase vet hours, but it may mean that they need more support in the induction and recovery stages of surgery. So don't forget about that piece. So they need to be spayed and neutered. They need to hit the floor. Fair enough? Okay. We're not going to do patient 3. Here's my helpful hints for daily rounds. It is a sacred time. Pick a time of day. 11:30 works for our shelter. 11:30, we get together. Whoever can come, comes. If you miss a day, that's okay. But the core team tries to assemble. You need to be efficient. As you can tell, I can be a little bit of a drill sergeant. You're moving quickly. Cage to cage, 30 seconds. Boom, go. Stay on task. No complaining about your shift or what else you need to do. Create a task list. Everybody comes with their piece of paper and writes down their little list of what needs to get done. Some shelters use a system, color-coded stickers or things on the cage cards for next steps, next action, so they can come back through after rounds and then move the animals that need to go. And designating a leader really helps. Who's your flow bee? Designate the person who's going to make sure they happen, especially in the beginning, because everyone's going to want to avoid them. That's the person who calls it together. They need to be strong. They need to be a little bit of a nag. But I promise you it will make a difference in your shelter. So do it. So back to the system, the shelter system. In conclusion, how to save lives. Consider your shelter capacity and act to hold to it. Put the number on the wall. This is how many we can humanely care for, and then really track how many you have so that you know when you're exceeding that and when you need to take more action. Put in proactive intake protocols. Make sure the protocols are in writing so that people can take action for sick animals, ill animals. What if I find a lesion on a cat at the intake? What should I do about that? It should be a clear plan what gets done. And this stuff takes time. I know it. Trust me. It takes time. But you need to have the stuff in place so people know how to act when they find something. Plan the pathway through the shelter. In your mind, you should be thinking the minute that animal walks in, what's its fastest way out? Boom. That's what needs to happen. Institute daily rounds. The other thing I would say, especially because so few of you had actually seen the ASV guidelines, is form a standards reading team. Print that document out, distribute it among your staff, have a little book club. It's like a book club to talk about the standards. Each section's like a page or two, at most 3, I think. And so what we did is we chose a section a week and got together and talked about it. Is it painful sometimes? Yes. But it was really helpful in going through that document together and being like, we do this, we do this, we do this. We don't do that. Who could do that? How can we do that? All right, let's get a task list together and then let's come back together. So I would encourage you to do that. Set goals, reward successes. Resources are in there, including some of the webinar sites, and this will be in the document for you. And I want to really thank the ASPCA, Maddie's Fund. Like Jan said earlier, our program wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Maddie's Fund. And for all of you for spending your Sunday sitting in a lecture hall listening to my voice. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much.